No one knows the day, but everyone knew what to watch for. Every single time someone has tried to calculate the exact date of Christ's return, that person has been wrong. Every time. No exceptions in 2,000 years. But that doesn't mean Jesus left no clues. It means we've been reading the wrong clue this whole time. Matthew 24 verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. That verse shows up in almost every sermon on prophecy, usually to close the conversation, not to open it. It gets used as a full stop, a polite way of saying let's not speculate any further. And that's an incomplete reading. Because within the original context in which Jesus said it, that sentence was not an invitation to silence. It was a direct reference, almost an inside joke, in the best sense, to a custom that every married person, or every person of marrying age sitting there listening to Jesus, would have recognized instantly. A wedding custom. And once you understand that custom, the phrase "no one knows the day" stops meaning "forget it," nothing can be known, and starts meaning something far more specific, far more useful, and, frankly, far more unsettling. No one knows the exact hour, but everyone knows exactly the season, and everyone is responsible for being ready within it. 1. The sentence nobody finishes reading. Look at what comes immediately after Matthew 24 verse 36. Jesus doesn't change the subject. He tells the story of Noah. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man, people eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they did not know, until the flood came. Right after that, he moves straight into chapter 25. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps, and went forth to meet the bridegroom. Notice the progression. Jesus links "no one knows the day" to a wedding scene that's coming right after it, and before that, to a scene of people living ordinary life without noticing what was approaching. Those 3 blocks, the unknown day, the example of Noah, the parable of the bridegroom, aren't 3 separate topics Jesus happened to place side by side. They're a single line of reasoning, and that line of reasoning only makes full sense once you understand how a wedding actually worked in 1st century Judea. Most Western Christians read the parable of the 10 virgins as a generic illustration about being prepared, without realizing that every detail in that story, the delayed bridegroom, the midnight shout, the oil that needs refilling, the door that closes, corresponds to a real, specific element of a wedding custom that every Jewish audience of that time knew by heart. Jesus wasn't inventing a random metaphor. He was using the most anticipated, most celebrated social event in the life of any Jewish family to explain the exact structure of his own return. 2. How a 1st century Jewish wedding actually worked. A traditional Jewish wedding unfolded in 2 major stages, separated by a period that could last months, sometimes close to a year. The first stage was the formal betrothal, called shidduchin, followed by kiddushin, the official, legally binding commitment. At this stage, the groom's father, or the groom himself acting through his family, paid the bride's family the moher, the bride price. That payment wasn't symbolic. It was a real financial commitment, a public sign that the groom was taking on full responsibility for his future wife. From that moment on, the couple was already considered legally bound, even while living in separate homes and, in many cases, without having yet been alone together. Once the betrothal was sealed, the groom went back to his father's house. And here's the central detail that ties everything together: the groom didn't go back to wait passively. He went back to build, or at least prepare, an additional room within or near his father's house, a new, dedicated space where the couple would live after the wedding feast. In some traditions, that room was called the heater, literally chamber. The construction could take months. In some of the more elaborate historical reconstructions, the whole process took roughly a full year. And here's the twist that changes everything: the one who decided when the room was ready wasn't the groom. It was his father. The groom's father inspected the construction and either declared himself satisfied or didn't. Only after that approval was the groom authorized to go get his bride. That means that during the entire preparation period, not even the groom himself knew the exact day he would be married. He knew the wedding was coming. He had a rough sense of which season it would fall in, based on how the construction was progressing. But the exact date, the exact night, was a decision that belonged exclusively to the father. Now reread Mark 13 verse 32 with that structure in mind. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. Not even the Son knows. Exactly like, in the wedding custom, not even the groom himself knew the exact day of his own wedding feast, only the Father knew, because only the Father had the authority to declare the construction finished and give the order to depart. Jesus wasn't admitting some strange gap in his own knowledge. He was describing, with cultural precision, the exact position a Jewish bridegroom occupied within his own wedding. 3. The Father's house and the place prepared. That background sheds new light on one of the most quoted verses at funerals, almost never connected to this context, John 14 verses 2-3. In my Father's house are many mansions, if it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Stop and read that again, not as an abstract promise about heaven, but as the literal words of a Jewish bridegroom to his betrothed, on the night before leaving her to go build the chamber in his Father's house. I go to prepare a place for you. That's exactly what a bridegroom said. I will come again and receive you unto myself. That's exactly what a bridegroom promised to do once his Father approved the construction. On the night before his own crucifixion, Jesus is speaking to the disciples exactly the way a bridegroom spoke to his bride at the betrothal ceremony. He's making his role within that structure unmistakable. He is the bridegroom, the Father is the one who decides the day, the house is being prepared, and the promise of return is absolute, even though the date hasn't been revealed. That detail changes how the whole passage reads. It isn't a generic comfort verse for someone who has lost a loved one, though it works beautifully in that context too. At its root, it's a betrothal declaration. And it connects directly back to the question that opened this video: why doesn't anyone know the day? Because the bridegroom is away, at the Father's house, building. And only the Father decides when the construction is finished. 4. The shout and the trumpet. Once the Father finally declared the construction complete, the most dramatic part of the custom began. The groom, usually at night, would leave his father's house accompanied by close friends, the friends of the bridegroom, mentioned several times in the Gospels, heading toward the bride's house. That walk was never silent. It was loud on purpose. Someone would blow the shofar, the ram's horn used on solemn occasions, and the group would shout through the streets to announce that the bridegroom was coming, giving the bride and her attendants time to prepare and go out to meet the procession. Now look at the parable of the 10 virgins with that detail in mind. Matthew 25 verse 6. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. A cry. At midnight. No advance notice of the exact hour, but within a window of time that all 10 young women knew was approaching, which is why all 10 brought lamps, not just the wise ones. The difference between them was never knowledge of the season. It was preparation for the hour within the season. Now compare that with the language used to describe Christ's return in 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. A shout and a trumpet. The exact same structure, word for word, as the Jewish wedding procession, the announcing cry, the sound of the trumpet, an arrival that catches off guard only those who weren't watching, and never those whose lamp was lit. 5. The day not even the religious leaders knew. There's an extra layer here that ties this custom directly back to the feast calendar we discussed in the previous video. In part of the Jewish tradition that developed after the 1st century, the Feast of Trumpets Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the 7th month on the biblical calendar, picked up a curious nickname in some teaching circles, Yom HaKseh, the hidden day, or in other phrasings, the day no one knows. The reason is technical and fascinating. Unlike almost every other biblical feast, which began on fixed, predictable dates within the lunar calendar, the exact start of Rosh Hashanah depended on direct observation of the new moon by qualified witnesses in Jerusalem. Even the Sanhedrin, Israel's highest religious council, had to wait for eyewitness testimony confirming the new moon had been sighted before officially declaring the feast had begun and ordering the shofar to be sounded. That means, in practice, not even Jerusalem's most respected religious leaders knew with absolute certainty, in advance, exactly what hour that feast would begin. They knew the approximate day. They knew it was coming. But final confirmation depended on a witness spotting something in the sky, followed by an official declaration only after that. Here's the honesty this requires: the direct association between that feature of Rosh Hashanah and the specific phrase Jesus uses in Matthew 24 verse 36 is a popular teaching connection among some Christian prophecy teachers, not a closed historical or academic consensus among scholars of Second Temple Judaism. But the structural similarity is, at the very least, too striking to ignore. A feast whose very start literally required visual observation and confirmation before the announcement, described by generations of rabbis as the hidden day, exactly the kind of language Jesus uses to describe his own return. 6. The bride who lived ready, not the bride who lived in panic. Back to the parable, the difference between the 5 wise virgins and the 5 foolish ones was never about who had more information about the date. None of the 10 knew the exact hour. All 10 fell asleep waiting. It's right there in the text, Matthew 25 verse 5, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. The sleep itself wasn't the failure. The failure, if we can even call it that, was the lack of extra oil. 5 of them carried reserve flasks, anticipating that the wait might stretch on longer than expected. 5 didn't, and when the cry came at midnight, they discovered too late that they didn't have enough fuel to keep the lamp burning to the end. That's the point almost always lost when no one knows the day gets quoted in isolation, stripped of this context. Within the culture of the Jewish wedding, it was never an invitation to passivity or resignation. Within that custom, it meant exactly the opposite, an invitation to live constantly stocked, constantly ready, because the call could come on any night within that expected season, and no one had the right to claim surprise when the season itself was already known to everyone. 7. The church's bride. The pattern repeats through the rest of Scripture. This isn't an isolated theme, used once and dropped. The image of the wedding between Christ and the church runs through the New Testament as a connecting thread. Ephesians 5 verses 31 to 32 describes the relationship between Christ and the church explicitly in terms of husband and wife, even quoting the language from Genesis about a man leaving his father and mother to be joined to his wife, and concluding, "This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church." Paul isn't using marriage as just one illustration among several available options. He's saying that human marriage, from the very beginning, has always been a smaller echo of a larger mystery, the relationship between Christ and his people. Revelation 19 verses 7 and 9 takes that image to its climax. "Let us be glad and rejoice, and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. Blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb." The final consummation of the story, in John's vision, isn't described as a cold, bureaucratic judgment. It's described as a wedding feast, with guests, with a banquet, with a bride who spent the waiting period getting ready, making herself ready, exactly the kind of language used to describe a bride dressing and adorning herself before the wedding procession arrives. And the picture is completed in Revelation 21 verse 2, where the New Jerusalem, the final city, is described as a bride adorned for her husband. The entire structure of the Bible, from beginning to end, is organized around this metaphor: betrothal, price paid, house prepared, waiting period, an unexpected call within an expected season, and a final feast. The wedding isn't a decorative detail of biblical prophecy. In many ways, it's the very structure that organizes it. 8. Isaac, Rebekah, and the servants sent to fetch the bride. There's an even older precedent that helps make sense of this structure, found in Genesis 24. Abraham, already old, sends his most trusted servant to find a wife for Isaac, his son, in a distant land. The servant doesn't choose on his own whim, he prays, asks for a specific sign, and finds Rebekah at the exact moment the sign is fulfilled. Rebekah agrees to go, even without ever having seen Isaac, trusting only the servant's word and the gifts he brought on behalf of the bridegroom's father. Many Christian readers, over the centuries, have noticed the parallel. The father Abraham represents God the Father, sending someone in his name to find a wife for the son. The servant, who isn't even named for much of the narrative and whose only function is to introduce the bridegroom and persuade the bride to leave, is often read as a figure of the Holy Spirit, whose role described in the New Testament is exactly that: to testify of the Son, to prepare the church's heart, and to guide her toward the bridegroom. By the end of the journey, Rebekah sees Isaac from a distance and gets down off the camel to meet him, Genesis 24 verse 64. The journey ends with a real, visible, unmistakable physical encounter. Not a second-hand report, not a rumor, the bride seeing the bridegroom with her own eyes. That detail connects directly to the principle of trust your eyes, not your ears, discussed in the previous video. Rebekah's journey was guided by the servant's word, but the final recognition of the bridegroom happened through direct sight. No second-hand account ever stood in for the real encounter. 9. Ruth, Boaz, and the Redeemer who held the legal right. Another equally rich precedent is found in the book of Ruth. Boaz isn't simply a suitor, he is the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, someone with both the right and the legal responsibility to redeem the property and the family name of a deceased relative by marrying the widow to preserve the family line. The whole story revolves around Ruth waiting, quietly, through the harvest season, not knowing the exact date Boaz would take formal initiative until the night when he, not she, makes the decisive move on the threshing floor, publicly declaring his intent to redeem her before the elders of the city. The pattern repeats. The bride doesn't control the calendar. The right to redeem, to seek, to take the initiative, belongs to the Redeemer, and he acts within a known season, the harvest, but at a specific moment only he chooses. Ruth prepares herself, positions herself, makes herself available, and waits. She doesn't force Boaz's hand. She lives ready for when he acts. 10. What this changes in practice. God's calendar has a clear pattern: Passover fulfilled on the exact day, Pentecost fulfilled on the exact day, with one chapter still open, tied to the Feast of Trumpets. Even within a calendar that precise, the exact hour remains deliberately out of human reach. That's not a flaw in the system. It's the system working exactly as it was designed, from Isaac's wedding, through Ruth's redemption, all the way to the bridegroom's promise in John 14. Church history is full of attempts to calculate the exact date, completely ignoring this structure. Every generation that tried to swap living ready for calculating the exact instant ended in public disappointment, in entire movements scrambling to reorganize, in credibility lost in front of everyone watching from the outside. That's not a criticism coming from outside the faith, it's an observation the text itself already anticipates. The parable never asks for a countdown clock. It asks for a lamp with reserve oil, every single night, no exceptions, for however long it takes. The practical question, then, isn't exactly when will this happen? It's a simpler and far more uncomfortable question: if the cry came tonight at midnight, would the lamp have enough oil to last however long the wait turns out to be? Being ready, in this context, doesn't mean living in constant, anxious alert, counting days in fear. It means exactly the opposite of panic, having reserves, spiritual, practical, relational, sufficient enough that the exact hour, whenever it is, catches no one off guard. 11. 3 questions to take from this video. First question: are you living like someone who knows the season, or like someone pretending not to know because it's more comfortable not to prepare? Second question: is your extra oil, your personal relationship with God, your daily decisions, your inner readiness being refilled regularly, or is it running on whatever's left from an old reserve? Third question, maybe the most direct of all: if your name were called tonight, would you get up recognizing the voice, or would you need someone to explain to you what was happening? These questions don't get answered in a video comment. They get answered, day after day, lived out within the season that has already been revealed, even though the exact hour hasn't been handed to anyone besides the Father. A note on sources and limits. The general structure of a first-century Jewish wedding: formal betrothal, payment of the bride price, a separation period during preparation of the dwelling, and a final ceremony marked by a public procession, is reasonably documented in sources from Second Temple Judaism and in later rabbinic records, mainly the Mishnah. More specific details, such as the exact use of the shofar during the wedding procession and the standard one-year duration for building the chamber, appear frequently in Christian teaching material on Jewish customs, but they combine sources from different periods, so they should be treated as a widely accepted illustrative reconstruction within teaching circles, not as historically certified, unanimous reporting among every scholar of the period. The association between Rosh Hashanah and the phrase "the hidden day" is well attested within later rabbinic tradition regarding dependence on new moon observation, but the direct link between that tradition and the specific phrase Jesus uses in Matthew 24 verse 36 is a popular teaching connection among contemporary Christian prophecy teachers, not a closed academic consensus. The typological readings of Isaac and Rebekah, and of Ruth and Boaz, as foreshadowing the relationship between Christ and the Church, are long-established interpretations within Christian tradition, but they remain theological readings, not claims about the original intent of the historical accounts the text itself records. This video does not set or suggest a date for Christ's return. It uses the Jewish wedding custom, and the related biblical precedents, to explain the original context of Jesus' words in Matthew 24 verse 36 and Mark 13 verse 32. If the feast calendar from the previous video showed you the when, and this video showed you the how, the question left standing is the most personal one of all. Have you actually entered the betrothal, or are you just watching someone else's story from the outside? That commitment doesn't require a calculation, doesn't require any formula, it only requires recognizing Jesus as Lord and trusting that God raised him from the dead. If you've never made that declaration, you can make it right now, quietly, wherever you are. Lord Jesus, I recognize you as Lord, I believe God raised you from the dead, and I give you my life. There's no required formula. There's a mouth that confesses and a heart that believes. If you're already inside that covenant, drop a comment. What do you think it actually looks like, day to day, to keep oil in the lamp right now? If this video opened a door the last one only cracked, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next piece of this prophetic puzzle is already in the works, and it connects the Feast of Tabernacles to something almost nobody has talked about in the book of Revelation yet. See you in the next video, and until then, keep the lamp burning.